This is Beyond the Mirror, The Curse of Bloody Mary, written by Galen Pierce Tate, read for you by 11 Labs AI text-to-speech, using the classic male voice provided by ChatGPT and 11 Labs. Chapter 2, Reflections of Terror. That night, Lena couldn't sleep. Every time she closed her eyes, her mind played tricks on her. Visions of Emma standing in front of the mirror, the sound of glass shattering, the scream that still echoed in her memory. It felt like the air in Emma's house was pressing down on her, thick with something unspoken, something wrong. After hours of tossing and turning in her sleeping bag, she gave up. Rachel was snoring softly next to her, finally at peace after hours of crying, but Lena was wide awake. Noah had left hours ago, promising to check in tomorrow, and Lucas had gone home, muttering something about not wanting to be around bad energy. Lena slipped out of her sleeping bag and padded quietly to the bathroom, the house eerily quiet in the dead of night. The moonlight filtered through the curtains, casting long, thin shadows that twisted and warped the familiar surroundings. She flicked on the bathroom light and stared into the mirror, splashing cold water on her face. The coolness was a relief, momentarily distracting her from the buzzing thoughts in her head. But when she looked up, her heart skipped a beat. For a split second, she thought she saw something, someone standing just behind her. A woman dressed in a long, tattered gown, her hair dark and tangled, her face obscured by shadows. Her eyes, empty hollow pits, stared directly at Lena through the glass. Lena whipped around, gasping, but the bathroom was empty. There was no one there. Her heart pounded in her chest as she turned back to the mirror. The figure was gone, leaving only her own pale reflection staring back at her, wide-eyed and trembling. She gripped the edge of the sink, her breath coming in short, sharp bursts. "Get it together, Lena," she muttered to herself, trying to steady the rising panic. It had to be her imagination, sleep deprivation, stress, guilt. All of it was catching up to her. That's what this was. There was no woman, no shadowy figure lurking in the mirror. It was just her mind playing tricks, but deep down, she didn't believe it. Lena turned off the bathroom light and hurried back to Emma's room, her nerves still on edge. She crawled back into her sleeping bag, forcing her eyes shut. She didn't want to think about it anymore. Didn't want to think about the empty-eyed woman or the cold, creeping sensation that had washed over her when she saw her. But the image stayed with her, burned into her mind like an afterimage. The hollow eyes, the dress, the way she had seemed to know Lena was looking at her. Lena squeezed her eyes shut, clutching the fabric of her sleeping bag like it could anchor her to reality. But every time she drifted towards sleep, the image flashed in her mind, dragging her back to that same uneasy feeling. Morning couldn't come fast enough. The next day, Lena walked into her house in a haze, her mind still trapped in the events of the night before. The sun was bright and cheerful, as if mocking her with its warmth, but she couldn't shake the cold, heavy sensation clinging to her skin. Her mother was in the kitchen, humming as she stirred a pot of soup. "Hey, honey," her mom said, glancing over her shoulder. "You okay? You look like you didn't sleep at all." Lena forced a weak smile, trying to sound normal. "Yeah, just a rough night." Her mom gave her a concerned look, wiping her hands on a towel. "You want to talk about it? You've been staying at Emma's a lot. Everything okay?" "Yeah, everything's fine," Lena said quickly, not wanting to dive into the whole mess again. Not when she could still feel the weight of Emma's absence pressing down on her chest. Just, high school stuff. Her mom didn't seem convinced, but she didn't push. "All right, just let me know if you need to talk." Lena nodded and made her way upstairs to her bedroom, her feet dragging with exhaustion. She needed to rest, to sleep and forget about mirrors and strange visions. She could figure it all out later. She flopped down on her bed, burying her face in her pillow. Sleep was creeping in, soft and comforting, but just as she was about to let herself fall into it, her phone buzzed. She groaned and reached for it, squinting at the screen. It was a message from Rachel. "Rachel, did you see anything strange last night? I keep thinking I'm seeing things in the mirror. It's probably nothing, but I'm freaking out." Lena's stomach twisted. She stared at the screen for a long moment, her fingers hovering over the keys, unsure of how to respond. How could she tell Rachel that she had seen something too? That she had felt the same creeping dread? She didn't want to make things worse. Didn't want to feed into the paranoia that was already taking hold of all of them. Finally, she typed a quick reply. Lena, it's probably just stress. We're all on edge after Emma, you know. She hit send and dropped her phone back onto the bed, rolling onto her side. The air in her room felt heavy, almost suffocating, and she couldn't shake the sense that something was watching her. It was stupid, she knew that. But the feeling was there, gnawing at her, refusing to let go. Her gaze drifted toward her closet, where her full-length mirror stood against the wall. The sunlight streamed across its surface, reflecting the room back at her in perfect clarity. But something about it felt wrong, off somehow. Lena's eyes narrowed, her heart thudding in her chest as she stared at the glass. Was it just the light, or was there something moving behind her reflection? She sat up slowly, her breath catching in her throat as she turned her head to look over her shoulder. Nothing. Her room was still, empty. But when she looked back at the mirror, she swore she saw it again, just for a split second. A shadow, a flicker of movement, like someone had been standing there, watching, just outside of her line of sight. Lena's heart pounded harder. She got up, yanked the mirror away from the wall, and shoved it into the corner face down. She didn't want to look at it again. Not today. Maybe not ever. Her phone buzzed again. Another message from Rachel. Rachel, it's not nothing. I know what I saw, Lena. I don't think we're alone. Lena's fingers trembled as she read the message, and her eyes flickered to the corner where she had hidden the mirror. She didn't know what was happening, but she had a sinking feeling Rachel might be right. They weren't alone. They had called something, and it was still watching. Rachel's breakdown. Later that afternoon, Lena sat at the cafe across from Rachel, stirring her iced coffee with little interest. The clinking of ice against glass was the only sound between them. Rachel hadn't touched her drink. Her eyes were hollow, rimmed with the dark circles of sleepless nights, her face pale like she'd seen a ghost. Maybe she had. Rachel had been quiet since they sat down, fidgeting with the straw in her cup, glancing nervously at every reflective surface in the room. Lena had noticed the way she kept avoiding the large windows that reflected the street outside, and how she flinched whenever someone passed behind her, their blurred shapes mirrored in the glass. It wasn't like Rachel to be this jumpy, this quiet. But then again, nothing had been normal since Emma disappeared. I haven't slept, Rachel whispered, breaking the silence. She didn't meet Lena's eyes, staring down at her untouched drink instead. Her fingers trembled as they traced the edge of the cup. Every time I close my eyes, I see her. See who? Lena asked, her heart sinking with dread. Bloody Mary, Rachel whispered, her voice barely audible, like saying the name would summon her right there in the cafe. Or whatever it was that we called. I can't stop seeing her, Lena, in the mirrors, in my dreams. Lena leaned in closer, her pulse quickening. She had seen something too, something she still couldn't explain. But hearing Rachel say it out loud made it all feel more real, more dangerous. What exactly do you see? Lena asked, her voice low. Rachel swallowed hard, finally lifting her eyes to meet Lena's. She's always there, in the mirrors. Her face is all wrong. Her eyes are black, like pits, and her skin's so pale it looks dead. And she's just standing there, watching me. Every time I look in the mirror, she's closer, like she's trying to. Rachel broke off, her voice trembling. Lena shuddered. It was exactly what she had seen in the bathroom mirror, the same shadowy figure with those empty, hollow eyes. Rachel, I saw her too, Lena admitted, her voice barely above a whisper. In the mirror at Emma's. I thought it was my imagination, but now I don't know. Rachel let out a shaky breath, her hands clenching into fists. It's not just the mirrors, Lena, it's everywhere. When I try to sleep, she's there, standing at the foot of my bed. She never moves. She just watches, and the nightmares. Rachel trailed off, her eyes distant, haunted. Lena felt a cold chill creep up her spine. What kind of nightmares? Rachel bit her lip, her fingers gripping the edge of the table so tightly that her knuckles turned white. I'm in my room, and everything is dark. I'm standing in front of my mirror, but my reflection isn't me, it's her. And she's smiling like she knows something I don't. Then the glass starts to crack, and I try to move, but I can't. I'm stuck, like I'm frozen, and she steps out of the mirror, like she's trying to take my place. I scream, but no one hears me. Lena's throat tightened. It was as if Rachel was describing something from her own nightmares, the same feeling of being trapped, of something lurking just beyond the glass. Have you told anyone else about this? Rachel shook her head, her voice small. No one would believe me. They'd think I'm crazy. My parents already think I'm just stressed from school, but it's not that. I know it's not. I haven't looked in a mirror in 2 days. I can't even be near one. Lena glanced around the cafe, her heart racing. The large windows behind Rachel reflected the world outside. Cars driving by, people walking past. But all Lena could focus on was the distorted image of Rachel's back, blurred and warped by the glass. She half expected to see the figure Rachel had described, standing just behind her, waiting. I'm scared, Rachel said, her voice breaking. I can feel her watching me. I think she's getting closer. Lena swallowed hard, trying to steady her own breathing. This was worse than she had thought. If Rachel was seeing the same thing, if they both were, what if she's trying to take us too? Rachel whispered, her eyes wide with fear. Like she took Emma. The words hit Lena like a punch to the gut. She hadn't wanted to believe it, that Emma's disappearance had anything to do with the ritual. But now, with Rachel sitting here, broken and terrified, Lena couldn't ignore the possibility anymore. We need to figure this out, Lena said, her voice firm despite the fear gnawing at her. We need to find out how to stop this before it gets worse. Rachel looked up at her, hope flickering in her eyes for the first time. How? We don't even know what we're dealing with. We'll find a way, Lena promised, though the weight of her own uncertainty pressed down on her. Maybe we can find someone who knows about this kind of thing. Someone who can help. Rachel nodded, though she still looked unsure. I can't do this alone, Lena. I feel like I'm losing my mind. You're not alone, Lena said, reaching across the table to squeeze Rachel's hand. We'll figure this out together. I won't let her take anyone else. Rachel's lip trembled, and she looked down at her drink again. I hope you're right. But as they sat there in the cafe, surrounded by the reflections in the windows, Lena couldn't shake the feeling that time was running out, that whatever they had summoned wasn't going to wait much longer, and she wasn't sure if they'd be able to stop it. They walked back to Rachel's house in silence, the early evening casting long shadows across the neighborhood. Lena could feel the weight of Rachel's fear pressing down on both of them, thick and suffocating. As they neared the front door, Rachel hesitated, her eyes flicking nervously toward the windows of her house. You coming in? Rachel asked, her voice barely audible. Lena nodded, not wanting to leave her friend alone. She didn't trust the empty house, not after everything they had talked about. Inside Rachel's house was eerily quiet. The usual hum of family life was missing. No TV, no conversations drifting from the kitchen. Just silence. Lena followed Rachel up the stairs, her nerves on edge, her eyes darting to every reflective surface they passed. The mirrors in the hallway seemed to stretch, bending the familiar images into something grotesque, something wrong. Rachel led her into her room, shutting the door behind them quickly, like she was afraid something might follow them in. Lena glanced around, noticing immediately that the mirror above Rachel's dresser had been covered with a sheet. Another small mirror on her wall had been turned to face the wall. I can't stand to look at them, Rachel said softly, following Lena's gaze. Not after what I've seen. Lena swallowed hard, her own reflection from earlier flashing in her mind. The woman. The eyes. Rachel sat down on her bed, pulling her knees to her chest. I'm so scared, Lena. I don't know how much longer I can handle this. Lena sat beside her, her own fear creeping back to the surface. She didn't have the answers, but she knew one thing for sure. They couldn't keep running from the mirrors. They had to face whatever was in them. But how? I'm going to figure this out, Lena said, more to herself than to Rachel. Whatever we summoned, whatever's happening, we're going to stop it. Rachel nodded, though her eyes were filled with doubt. Lena couldn't blame her. She wasn't sure she believed herself either. A ghostly encounter. The house was quiet, too quiet, when Lena returned home that night. Her mom had already gone to bed, the faint sound of the TV murmuring from the other room. Lena tiptoed through the hallway, her mind still racing from the conversation with Rachel. The thought of Bloody Mary, or whatever they had summoned, was gnawing at her, refusing to leave her alone. She climbed the stairs, her legs heavy with exhaustion, and headed straight to her room, not bothering to turn on the lights. The moonlight streamed through her window, casting soft silver beams across the floor. Everything was as it should be: her bed, her desk, the faint glow of her laptop charging on the floor. But the mirror, it was still in the corner, face down, where she had shoved it earlier that day. The urge to hide it, to never look at it again, gnawed at her. But the rational part of her mind, the part still clinging to logic, was trying to push back. It was just a mirror, nothing more. Yet her heart hammered in her chest at the mere sight of it. Lena sat down on the edge of her bed, her gaze drawn to the overturned mirror like a magnet. She didn't want to think about it, but she couldn't stop. The image of that pale, hollow-eyed woman was still burned into her mind, and Rachel's words echoed in her head. "I think she's getting closer." Lena swallowed hard, trying to push the fear down. She hadn't seen anything since that moment in the bathroom. Maybe that was it, just one scare, nothing more. Maybe Rachel was right, and they were all just letting the stress get to them. She stood up, crossing the room to where the mirror lay. Her hand hesitated over it, her fingers hovering just above the edge. The rational part of her brain screamed that it was just glass, nothing more, but her instincts warned her not to flip it over. With a deep breath, Lena reached down and lifted the mirror. At first, it was just her reflection, pale and tired, her hair slightly tangled, eyes rimmed with dark circles. She let out a slow breath, relieved. There was no shadowy figure this time, no dark presence lurking behind her, just her. But then, out of the corner of her eye, she saw something. She froze, her heart skipping a beat. In the reflection just behind her, it wasn't a dark figure this time. It was Emma. Her heart stopped. Emma stood in the reflection, her familiar messy ponytail and the t-shirt she'd worn the night of the sleepover. But her eyes, Lena could see them clearly now. They were wide, staring directly at her through the glass, filled with terror. Her lips moved, forming a silent word. Lena. Lena's breath caught in her throat. She whipped around, her eyes searching the room, but there was no one there. Her room was empty, the air still. She turned back to the mirror, panic rising in her chest. Emma's reflection was still there, standing just behind where Lena had been moments before, her mouth moving soundlessly, eyes pleading. She looked like she was trapped inside the glass. "Emma?" Lena whispered, her voice trembling. She reached out toward the mirror, her fingertips brushing the cold surface, but nothing changed. "Emma, can you hear me?" The reflection flickered. For a second, it was gone. Emma's image disappeared, leaving only Lena's pale, horrified face staring back at her. But then it returned, stronger, clearer, as if Emma was struggling to break through. "Lena, help me," Emma mouthed, her hand pressing against the inside of the glass, as though she were trapped behind it. Her eyes were wide, filled with desperation, as she mouthed the words again. Asterisk, help me. Lena's heart raced, her mind reeling. This couldn't be real, it couldn't be Emma, but it was her. Every detail was exactly right, down to the faded print on her t-shirt, and the fear in her eyes. That was real. "How?" Lena whispered, tears pricking at the corners of her eyes. "How can I help you?" Emma's reflection flickered again, her mouth still moving, but the words were lost. The image started to distort, like a ripple through water, warping Emma's face, stretching it into something unnatural. Her eyes darkened, her features twisting, becoming less Emma and more of something else. Lena stumbled back, her hand dropping from the mirror. "No, no!" The reflection of Emma's distorted face grew darker, her once pleading expression melting into a sinister smile. Her mouth widened unnaturally, stretching far too wide, her blackened eyes locking onto Lena's. Emma, or whatever it was grinning now, a cruel, mocking smile that sent a chill straight through Lena's bones. It wasn't Emma anymore. Lena's pulse pounded in her ears. She tried to move, but her feet felt glued to the floor, frozen in place, as the reflection stared back at her. The smile twisted further, stretching into something inhuman, something that no longer resembled her friend. "Run!" her mind screamed, But she couldn't. She couldn't move. The lights flickered, plunging the room into momentary darkness. Lena gasped, the sound loud in the thick, oppressive air. Her heart was racing, her breath coming in short, panicked bursts. And then the light snapped back on, the room bathed in harsh white. The reflection was gone. Emma was gone. Lena stood there, trembling, her eyes locked on the mirror, but now it was only showing her own wide-eyed, terrified face. No flicker, no shadow, no twisted smile, nothing but her. She backed away, her legs unsteady, her breath coming in shallow gasps. Her heart pounded so loudly in her chest that she could barely hear her own thoughts. She stumbled back to her bed, collapsing onto it, her hands shaking uncontrollably. She didn't understand. What had just happened? Was it real? Had she imagined the whole thing? But it had felt so real. Emma had been there, she'd seen her, heard her, or had it been something else? Something pretending to be Emma? Lena clutched her head, her mind racing, trying to make sense of what she had just seen. It was impossible. Emma was gone, missing. The police didn't have any answers, and now, the reflection, that smile. Lena's chest tightened. Whatever she had seen, it wasn't Emma, not anymore. Her phone buzzed on the nightstand, startling her out of her spiraling thoughts. With shaking hands, she picked it up, hoping for a message from Noah, Rachel, anyone who could ground her in reality. But when she looked at the screen, her blood turned to ice. It was a text from Emma's phone. "Emma, I'm waiting for you." Lena's fingers trembled as she stared at the message. The words glowed on her screen, impossibly bright in the dim room, and her stomach twisted with dread, her heart pounding wildly. She didn't want to believe it, couldn't believe it. But deep down she knew. Whatever was pretending to be Emma, it was coming for her next. Seeking answers. Lena didn't sleep that night. The text message from Emma's phone sat on her screen like a threat, her mind racing in 1,000 directions as she tried to make sense of it. She wanted to block the number, delete the message, pretend it didn't exist, but each time her thumb hovered over the delete button, she froze. What if it was Emma? What if she was reaching out, trapped somewhere? But deep down, Lena knew better. It wasn't Emma. That twisted smile in the mirror, the warped reflection, it wasn't her friend. It was something else, something pretending. She had no idea how to stop it, or even what it was. And the police? They didn't believe her, couldn't explain Emma's disappearance. If Lena told them about the message or what she'd seen, they'd only think she was losing her mind. Maybe she was. By morning, Lena had made up her mind. If no one else would help, she'd figure it out herself. She spent hours poring over every resource she could find. She scoured the internet, buried herself in forums and Reddit threads, digging deeper into the lore of Bloody Mary and similar urban legends. There were countless variations of the story. Some said she was the spirit of a murdered woman seeking revenge. Others said she was a witch who cursed anyone foolish enough to summon her. But there was no single version that explained exactly what Lena and her friends were dealing with. None of it quite fit. Still, the stories she read filled her with a sickening dread. In every version, someone always disappeared. They would stand before a mirror, say the name 3 times, and vanish without a trace. Sometimes it was immediate. Other times, they'd start seeing things in mirrors, experiencing strange phenomena, until one night they simply weren't there anymore. Those who survived told stories of seeing a woman's face in the mirror, of hearing their name whispered in dark corners. Most of them were written off as hoaxes, urban legends passed down from one generation to the next. But to Lena, they felt all too real. One story in particular stood out. A girl named Sophie had disappeared after playing Bloody Mary with a group of friends. Her account, posted by a grieving sibling years later, was chillingly similar to Emma's situation. Sophie had been obsessed with the game, daring her friends to try it during a sleepover, just like Emma had. Days after, Sophie began seeing strange reflections in mirrors, twisted faces, figures that didn't belong. She told her friends she felt like someone was watching her, and soon after, she vanished. Her room was untouched, and no one could explain what had happened. The case remained unsolved. Lena's heart pounded as she read the story again, her fingers trembling. Could this be what had happened to Emma? Was she trapped, like Sophie? She clicked through more links, diving deeper into the rabbit hole. The stories varied. Some claimed Bloody Mary only came for those who were truly afraid, while others suggested that the ritual wasn't just a game, but a doorway to something far darker. One recurring theme, though, was that the spirits seemed to feed off fear, growing stronger with each sighting, each terrified glance into a mirror. Lena closed her laptop, rubbing her temples. The air in her room felt thick, heavy with an oppressive sense of dread. If these stories were to be believed, then Bloody Mary, whatever she was growing stronger. And Emma might not be the only target. Her phone buzzed, breaking the suffocating silence. She jumped, heart leaping into her throat. But it wasn't another message from Emma's phone. It was Noah. Noah. Hey, how are you holding up? I was thinking we could meet up today, talk things through. I've been thinking about Emma. Lena's fingers hovered over the keyboard, unsure of how to respond. Noah had always been the practical one, the voice of reason. But how could she explain what she'd seen? He wouldn't believe her. He'd try to rationalize it, tell her it was all in her head. But still, she needed help. She couldn't do this alone. Lena, I've been reading up on Bloody Mary. I think we're in serious trouble. Can you come over? Noah's response was quick. Noah, on my way. Lena exhaled slowly, a mixture of relief and anxiety flooding her chest. She wasn't sure how Noah would react, but at least he was coming. She needed to tell someone, needed to figure out if they could stop whatever was happening. 20 minutes later, Noah arrived, his face drawn with concern. He didn't say much when he came in, just sat down on the edge of her bed, folding his hands in his lap. He looked exhausted, dark shadows under his eyes. She wondered if he was sleeping any better than she was. So, Noah began, rubbing the back of his neck, you've been researching Bloody Mary? Lena nodded, pulling her laptop back onto her lap. There's so much about her. Different stories, different variations, but none of it really explains what happened to Emma. There are too many versions. Noah leaned in, glancing at the screen as Lena scrolled through another forum post. But we're not dealing with just any version, right? We did the same thing everyone says, 3 times in front of a mirror, but Emma's the only one who's gone. Lena's chest tightened at the word, gone. She wasn't ready to think about Emma in the past tense. There's something else, Lena said, her voice quiet. I've been seeing things in mirrors, and Rachel has too. She's terrified. She hasn't looked in a mirror since that night, and last night I saw Emma in the mirror, but it wasn't her. Noah's expression hardened, his eyes narrowing. What do you mean it wasn't her? Lena swallowed, her throat dry. She looked like Emma at first, but then she changed. Her face twisted into something unnatural, and she smiled at me, Noah. It wasn't Emma. It was something else. Noah stared at her for a long moment, his expression unreadable. Lena, that sounds like a nightmare. It wasn't a nightmare, Lena snapped, frustration rising. I was awake. I saw her in the mirror, and she was trying to talk to me. Then she changed into something wrong. Noah rubbed his temples, letting out a slow breath. Look, I get that you're scared. We all are. But don't you think maybe you're letting this get to you? After what happened with Emma, it's normal to feel paranoid. I'm not paranoid, Lena said, her voice trembling. Something is happening, Noah, and it's real. Noah sighed, leaning back. Okay, say you're right. What does this mean? What are we supposed to do about it? Lena shook her head. I don't know yet, but we can't just pretend it's not happening. I've read too many stories like ours, people disappearing after playing the game. It's not just an urban legend. It's real. Noah stared at her, the weight of her words sinking in. His skepticism was still there, hovering just beneath the surface, but she could see the fear in his eyes too. What about the police? Noah asked, though he already knew the answer. They won't believe us, Lena said bitterly. They think Emma just ran off, but I know she didn't. Something took her. Noah was silent for a moment, his jaw clenched. So, what do we do now? Lena's heart raced as she met his eyes. We find a way to stop it, before it takes anyone else. Noah's gaze softened, but his face remained tense. How? Lena glanced at her laptop, at the stories of people like them, desperate and afraid. She didn't have a clear answer, But there was something gnawing at the back of her mind, something she had read about Bloody Mary, about the way the spirit seemed to trap people in mirrors, to twist reality. "We need to understand what we're dealing with," Lena said slowly. "There has to be a reason this is happening. Maybe it's not just about saying her name. Maybe there's more to it, a reason she comes after people." Noah sighed, rubbing his face with his hands. "And how do we figure that out?" Lena stared at the screen, her stomach knotting. "We find someone who knows more than we do, someone who's dealt with this kind of thing before." "Like who?" Noah asked, raising an eyebrow. "An exorcist?" Lena shook her head. "No, someone who understands these kinds of legends, someone who can help us figure out how to break this." Noah didn't respond right away. He just stared at her, the weight of their situation settling between them like a suffocating cloud. Finally, he nodded. "Okay," he said softly. "Let's find someone who can help." But as the words left his mouth, Lena's phone buzzed again. Another text. Her hands trembled as she picked it up, dread pooling in her stomach. The text wasn't from Noah or Rachel. It was from Emma's phone again. "Emma, you can't stop this." Lena's blood ran cold. The detective's warning. The text from Emma's phone haunted Lena long after she and Noah had tried, unsuccessfully, to rationalize it. They had stared at the message for what felt like hours, exchanging nervous glances but coming to no conclusion. Whoever, or whatever, was sending the text wasn't Emma. It couldn't be. But that only made things worse. It meant something was playing with them, taunting them, reminding them that they weren't in control. The day passed in a blur of fear and confusion. Lena had barely eaten, her mind stuck in a loop of what-ifs. What if Emma was really gone, trapped somewhere between their world and the one beyond the mirrors? What if it wasn't just Emma in danger? What if they were next? When the knock on the door came that evening, Lena felt a jolt of dread. She hadn't been expecting anyone. Noah, sitting beside her on the couch, raised an eyebrow. "You expecting someone?" he asked, his voice tight. Lena shook her head, her pulse quickening as she stood and approached the door. A chill ran down her spine as she peeked through the peephole. It was a man, older, wearing a worn leather jacket and dark jeans. His graying hair was cropped short, and he stood with a kind of tired authority that instantly made Lena feel on edge. She didn't recognize him, but something about his presence sent a wave of unease through her. She opened the door cautiously. "Can I help you?" "Are you Lena Evans?" the man asked, his voice rough but calm. Lena hesitated. "Yeah, who are you?" The man reached into his jacket and pulled out a badge. "Detective Parker Williams. I'm investigating Emma Ortiz's disappearance." Noah, hearing this, stood up from the couch, stepping behind Lena. "What's going on?" Williams looked past Lena at Noah and gave a small nod. "I need to talk to both of you. Mind if I come in?" Lena exchanged a glance with Noah before stepping aside. Williams walked in, his eyes scanning the room like he was assessing every inch of it. He took a seat on the edge of the armchair, his posture rigid, his expression hard to read. "Why are you here?" Lena asked, her voice tense. "We already spoke to the police. They didn't seem too interested in helping." Williams nodded slowly, resting his hands on his knees. "I know. I read the report, but I'm not here to ask about what happened at the sleepover." Lena's breath caught in her throat. "Then what are you here for?" The detective sighed, rubbing the back of his neck. "This isn't the first time I've come across something like this." Noah frowned, stepping closer to Lena. "What do you mean?" Williams glanced between them, his gaze heavy. 15 years ago, there was another girl who went missing under very similar circumstances. A case that never got solved. His voice dropped, the weight of his words hanging in the air. Lena's heart skipped a beat. "What do you mean, similar circumstances?" Williams leaned forward, his expression grim. "She went missing after playing the Bloody Mary game." The room fell silent, the words sinking into the atmosphere like a thick, cold fog. Lena stared at him, her mind racing. Bloody Mary. The game. It wasn't just them. This had happened before. Noah was the first to break the silence. "Are you serious? This actually happened before?" Williams nodded, his eyes dark and tired. I was the lead investigator on the case. The girl Anna was 15 at the time. She and her friends played the game at a sleepover just like you and Emma did. The next morning, Anna was gone. No sign of forced entry, no evidence of foul play. It was like she vanished into thin air. Lena felt a knot of dread twist in her stomach. And you never found her? William shook his head, his jaw tightening. No, we never found her. And no one believed the other girls when they told us about Bloody Mary. It sounded like nonsense, an urban legend. But now, he trailed off, his eyes locking onto Lena's. Now I'm not so sure. Lena's throat was dry. She glanced at Noah, whose expression was a mixture of shock and disbelief. Why are you telling us this now? Noah asked, his voice low. Because I couldn't help Anna, William said, his voice rough. And I can't shake the feeling that whatever happened to her is happening to Emma. I should have listened to those girls back then, taken their fears more seriously. But I didn't, and Anna's case went cold. I don't want the same thing to happen to Emma. Lena sank onto the couch, her mind spinning. So, you think this Bloody Mary thing is real? That it actually took Anna? Williams hesitated, his expression clouded with something Lena couldn't quite read. I don't know what to believe anymore. But the parallels between Anna's case and Emma's, they're hard to ignore. After Anna vanished, the other girls, her friends, started seeing things, reflections, shadows. One of them even claimed she got a message from Anna through her phone. Lena's blood ran cold. A message from Anna? Williams nodded slowly, his gaze sharp as he observed her reaction. They couldn't trace it. The message was gone by the time they checked her phone, but her friends swore it happened. And given Emma's disappearance, it felt like a warning. Lena's stomach twisted as she remembered the messages she had received from Emma's phone, still sitting on her screen like a silent threat. She hadn't told Williams about them, not yet. Williams took a deep breath. When I saw the similarities between Anna's case and Emma's, I knew it couldn't be a coincidence. Noah, who had been pacing back and forth, stopped abruptly. So what do we do? How do we stop it? Williams let out a slow breath, rubbing his face with his hand. That's the problem. I don't know how to stop it. I've been chasing answers for years, but every lead goes cold. Every theory comes up empty. Lena stared at him, the weight of his words sinking in. You mean there's no way to fix this? No way to bring Emma back? The detective looked at her, his expression grim. I don't know, but I'm not giving up. There's something out there, something tied to that legend. And if we don't figure out what it is, more people could disappear. Lena's heart pounded in her chest, her mind whirling with a mixture of fear and desperation. She had hoped that Williams might have some answers, some way to stop the nightmare they were trapped in. But instead, all he had were more questions, more uncertainty. Why didn't you tell the police about this sooner? Noah asked, his voice sharp with frustration. Why didn't you warn us? Williams' eyes darkened. Because I didn't want them to think I was losing it. I've already been called crazy once before, after Anna disappeared. No one believed me then, and they wouldn't believe me now. I needed to make sure this wasn't just a coincidence. Lena swallowed hard, the fear gnawing at her insides. But it's not a coincidence, is it? This thing is real. It's taking people. The detective stood, his expression heavy. I'm going to do everything I can to find Emma, but I'm going to need your help. Lena blinked, confused. Our help? How? Williams met her eyes, his voice low. By telling me everything. Every detail of what you've seen, what you've experienced. The more we know, the better chance we have of stopping this. Lena hesitated, her heart pounding. She glanced at Noah, who nodded slightly, his expression firm. They didn't have much of a choice. If there was even a chance they could find Emma, they had to take it. Okay, Lena said quietly. We'll tell you everything. Williams nodded, but the weight of the moment pressed down on all of them. Lena could feel it, a cold, creeping sense of dread that told her this wasn't going to be easy. Whatever had taken Emma, whatever had haunted Anna's friends 15 years ago, it wasn't going to stop, and they might be running out of time. As they recounted the events of that night, Emma's dare, the broken mirror, the strange reflections, they could feel the room growing heavier, the air thick with the presence of something unseen. Williams listened intently, his face drawn and grim, taking notes on everything they said. By the time they finished, the sun had begun to set, casting long shadows across the room. Williams closed his notebook, his expression unreadable. "Whatever this is," he said, standing up slowly, "it's not finished with you yet." Lena's stomach twisted with fear. "What do you mean?" Williams's eyes were dark, filled with the weight of years spent chasing something he could never quite catch. "This thing, it doesn't just take people, it comes back for more. You're all part of it now. It's not just about Emma, it's about you too." Lena felt a cold sweat break out across her skin, her heart pounding in her chest. "But we didn't do anything wrong. We didn't mean to summon anything." Williams nodded grimly. "That's the thing, it doesn't care." As the detective left, the weight of his warning hung in the air, thick and suffocating. Lena felt Noah's hand on her shoulder, but it did little to ease the gnawing fear creeping up her spine. It wasn't just Emma in danger. They all were. Thank you for joining us on this journey beyond the mirror, The Curse of Bloody Mary, written by Galen Pierce Tate and narrated by 11 Labs AI Text-to-Speech. If you enjoyed this audiobook and want to stay connected for more thrilling stories and immersive experiences, please subscribe to our YouTube channel. Hit the bell icon so you'll be the first to know when new audiobooks and content are released. We appreciate your support, and we can't wait to bring you even more adventures. Until next time, stay curious and keep exploring the unknown.